chapter 5. Right, Dan?
Yeah.
All right. Honor Widows is the title the editors of my copy of the Scriptures put in place. Do not sharply rebuke an older man, but rather appeal to him as a father. He's writing to a young minister, of course, and he's giving him all kinds of instructions, warning him about a coming apostasy and so on. And now, how do you deal with the younger or the older persons in your congregation? I remember when I was at First Baptist in Lower Miami, I was 20-something, and many of them were retired. Not all, but there was an element of older people there like there are here, and they didn't know what to think of me at all. They would tell me, young man, you've got a lot to learn, and I knew that. One old guy would tell me every time I walked him home at night that I needed to get a job so I could be respectable, that it wasn't right for me to freeload as a pastor and take advantage of other people. So we had all kinds of things going on there. But when you are in a congregation, and we're not all in the pastor's position, but this is advice for all God's people. But he does say, don't sharply rebuke an older man, like calling him to task and say, what's the matter with you? He says, rather, appeal to him as a father. Treat him with respect. Deal with the issue, but don't just pounce on him in an authoritative, disciplinary fashion. Come at it a little differently. That works better for us, doesn't it? If someone wants to correct us, if they come around the corner gently and calmly, everything works out a little better. What's that? Most generally, yes. Do not sharply rebuke an older man, but rather appeal to him as a father, to the younger men as brothers, and older women as mothers, and the younger women as sisters in all purity. And so he's calling this person to adapt himself to each individual person and situation. They're take into account their age and what they understand and don't understand. If you're always making people mad at you, you can't communicate to them. You can't do that. When Sam was in his extreme reprobate state, there were times when Shirley and I really didn't want to see him. And we had to get a grip on ourselves. If for some reason we would have cut him off during those ugly days, we could never have had any more influence on him. You might have to limit how exposed you are to their lifestyles in order to survive, but you can't help someone you have no relationship with. So you can stay with your friends at a bit of distance and not involve yourself with their sinful lifestyle, but you if it's at all possible, maintain a friendship with them at least, so that you can have hope of sharing the gospel with them at some point in time. But he is calling this minister to purity in thought, word, and deed, and an adaptive attitude that changes in reference to the people he has to deal with. Honor widows who are widows indeed. Y'all remember what a widow indeed is?
With no family.
No family and no means of support. No one's tending to her. And so this person comes to rest in the arms of a local church. And we tend to them. When one of our own has no other means of survival, we help them. If this is a widow who has all kinds of children and family and resources, then we need to think carefully about that before, as they would put it in the New Testament, before we put them on the roll of widows that we care for. monetarily and with time. Not that we just leave them alone because they've got people of their own, but this is talking about putting them under the care and monetary support of the church, food, clothing, shelter, whatever they have to have. So that's what it is. And so honor widows who are widows indeed. If you've got an unbelieving gal in the church that's been married 17 times and now she's killed her other husband, that's in question. That's a great question right there. You don't put them on the roll and say, well, we'll take care of you, sister. So there's a qualification here. If they're widows indeed, if they have been left destitute, then we are required to tend to them. If they have no other means of support. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. And so if our parents come to this position, which some do, then you can't just do what the Jews did and declare whatever extra money they had as dedicated to God and you can't have it. You tend to your family. You tend to your family. That's what you do. This is also what I say to people who call me and they want money for a motel room. I say, well, do you have any family in the area? Many times they do. And I said, well, why don't you go to them? They said, well, we don't talk anymore. And I tell them, you need to go fix that. Make your apologies. If you've burnt your bridge with your family, you need to sort it out. And I don't buy them a room. So, hard-hearted or what? We have bought many, many, many places to stay for people over the years, and we feed them and all kinds of stuff. But there are some qualifications to that. I've discovered people who travel from coast to coast every year just because they like the weather in different places, and they don't work, they travel on the backs of churches. And when I come to understand who I'm dealing with, that's the end of it. I might take them and buy them a burger or get them something to drink or some clothes, but I'll give them no money. No one has a right to be a freeloader. If a man don't work, he don't eat. And if you can travel from coast to coast every year, you're not in too bad a shape to have some kind of a job. Yeah, yes?
Well, I was listening to the sermon, I don't know if it was Bodie or Stephen, and he said, the solution is to go back to the Bible times. If you don't work, you don't eat.
Right.
And he said that works. This new system with the government giving free food to everybody does not work. You can just take advantage of it.
Yeah. If you're unable to take care of yourself, then people need to take care of you. If you can't, then there needs to be provision from some source. If you won't, that is the solution.
Well, you got over 50 million people on food stamps in the United States. That's a lot.
Some of them it's necessary and some of it's not.
Yes.
So it's the system is not made to sort that out, and it's really not made to help. When someone on welfare or in that position begins to stand up on their own, the system immediately cuts back on what they're giving them, even though they've got a job that doesn't pay enough. It should stay there for a time as long as they're progressing until there's enough money coming in for them to stand on their own. But they jerk the rug right out from under them so they don't go get a job because they make more money this way. So I'm glad it's there, but it's flawed, isn't it?
Yeah, and making control it.
Yes, yes. They are their subjects. Yep. All right. Now she who is a widow indeed and who has been left alone has fixed her hope on God and continues in entreaties and prayers day and night. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. One is saved and seeking the glory of God, and one is just looking for a handout. Prescribe these things as well so that they may be above reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. King James, infidel, which means unsavable person. Our job as fathers and mothers is to tend to our own, is to care for them and not make them resort to the government. But if Larry's coming home with his whole crew, Larry needs a job. He needs a job. And he needs to help around the family house, and he needs to help with the chores, and everybody's got to contribute. And if Larry is too doggone lazy, well, if he's only got one leg, then we make an exception. We take care of that. But if he's got all these parts and his mind is functional and he's just too lazy to work, then he can hit the road and I'll tend to his children. You have to have something in place for situations like this. Am I out of line here? Okay. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. What do we see here? We see something in support of church membership, don't we? Paul is saying, he is talking to a young pastor about the people he's responsible for, which is not every human being that comes across his path, but as a pastor, he is to shepherd, instruct, and correct the people that are members of his church. That these people have been entrusted to him. And he can't ignore that, or he'll not be a shepherd at all. So these are identifiable people. If there's a widow in your congregation, if there's this kind of widow, if there's that kind of widow, if there's this young man or this old man, this is how you treat them.
Didn't the Pharisees do in their own folks? Didn't Christ talk about?
They robbed them of their keep, yes. Yes, they pronounced the money that they would have or should have used to care for them as dedicated to God and said, I can't help you. Yeah. So, prescribe these things as well. Let's see, number 9. A widow is to be put on the list. Now there's another church membership indicator, isn't it? Yeah, it's not just every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wanders in the back door. It's the people who are in this church family that are first priority in this instruction. The list, what list? The list of people in your congregation, widows in particularly, who should not be provided for, and the list of those who should. Where's the one that's on her own? She who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. I'm sorry, you show no evidence of seeking the Lord, and this is not a bank account. You're welcome to be here. If you want to understand the gospel, we'll explain it to you. And if you're hungry right now, my wife and I will take you to get a meal, but we're not giving you any money. Your lifestyle has brought you to this, and you're still in the middle of it. Can't do it. Can't do it. A widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, qualification, having been the wife of one man, having a reputation for good works, and if she has brought up children, if she has shown hospitality to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet. What are we looking at here? The fruit of the Spirit, aren't we? We're looking at evidence that she's a follower of God, a believer in Jesus. Devoted herself to every good work, but refused to put younger widows on the list, for when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation because they have set aside their previous pledge. So church is not, the walls are not all lined with soft foam. and happy doodads and smiles. The church is a real practical thing that functions and can function well if we don't pay attention to these sorts of things. A few times over the years, we've had to say goodbye to some people. You cannot be here like you are. You behave or you go on your way. And that just makes you cry and breaks your heart. But you can't leave a cancer in a healthy body and expect the body to stay healthy. One rotten apple in a bunch just migrates. So there are some tough things that he's talking about, but they are necessary things for the health of a congregation. At the same time, these younger widows learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Have you ever noticed that? Idleness leads to useless activity and damaging activity. Yeah. Did you see trying to recall the name of a soap opera. Have you seen the latest episode of The World Turns? Does that still exist? I don't know. Before I was saved, me and the swing shift crew, we would watch our soaps before we came to work with our wives, and then we would come and say, "Can you believe he did that?" Just like a bunch of old gals. But
look at today's youth, the gang activity. There's no control there, and they want. He would have got 5,000 tattoos, mostly on his face, and he would have given you the shirt off his back. And he can't even see through his eyes. He's got them squinted down so low, and all look at the earrings. I'm amazed at the youth. There are, just like there are different reasons for young men to be in those situations, we have to remember that there are different reasons they're there. Some of them are there by threat, I presume, by some measure of force, want of care and love at home, need for companionship, got no structure around them at all, and this provides some. I don't know what the mentality of all that is, but we have to look past all of those exterior things and see a never-dying soul, of course, yes, and get the gospel to them somehow. And so they learn to be idle. And that's another thing that the welfare system does sometimes, because it's not set up right. If a person is trying to climb out, and every time they get a step up, the support they had is sucked out from under them, they soon learn to be idle, because that's more profitable than working. It's not treating them with honor at all. It's not helping them. So we've got to take things into account.
People that want to work, want to improve their lives.
Right. Because they can't make that step because this is cut off, and that's not enough yet. So there's a place for it. If in that world everyone that was able-bodied was required to work, clean the streets or cemeteries, or work in shelters, or they were required to be productive, that would change a lot. That would change a lot. But not everyone is able. Many are, but not everyone.
That's set on heaven. You don't favor this world.
At the same time, they learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Therefore, I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach. That's good advice, isn't it? What should I do? My husband died. Well, you're going to have to grieve for a while, and then begin to pray that God will give you another husband. Someone to care for you and meet your spiritual and physical and emotional needs. So I want younger widows to get married. Verse 15, for some have already turned aside to follow Satan. Now, would the church be involved in that? He says, I want younger widows to get married. What advice would we give them? Only in the Lord. Only in the Lord. If they appear to be believers, if they're honestly in need and the church is keeping their heads above water, and they seem to be a godly person, then our advice needs to be biblical to them. You can't just choose anybody because you're a single widow and you need someone to support you. You've got to be picky. It's got to be a brother in Christ. Verse 16, if any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. You see the distinction? Yeah. If someone in your family has widows that are dependent on them, that's your assignment, is to keep them alive and give them shelter, so that the church is not burdened, so that they will have the means to help widows indeed who have no one to help them. And that's our assignment. Yes, sir.
John, what about women that have their first husband and he died, she remarries, and that husband died? Now does that still cover that just with one man? Is that
No, she's
a different one?
If this is let's pretend this is a believer you're talking about. First husband dies, and hopefully she didn't kill him. Her second husband dies. She's still a widow.
Okay.
And if perhaps the circumstances have left her with enough money to survive, or perhaps she's able to work, but if not, she is a widow indeed. If she's destitute, her brothers and sisters have to come alongside of her and help her. She's beyond the list. Any other comments? If any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. We have had very young people with jobs come to Sovereign Grace and try to treat it like a bank account, asking and begging for this and that. Brother Steve went to, and I don't know if there was another deacon with him or not, they were requiring so much help that I sent Steve and somebody else, I think, to their house. And he said this guy has 1,000 knives and 1,000 guns, and he collects all kinds of trinkets and doodads. And he says, I told him, you sell all of this and get rid of cable TV, and we'll bring you some food. You can't do that to an organization, and we mustn't let it happen to us. Is it doing him any good? No. Discipline's what the character needs. All right. Any comment more about that?
It's a big solution. Keep your nose to the Bible, go to church, and help as you can.
Help as you can. One person can't do it all, but one person can contribute to the whole, and we can help.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt started the social system of giving people Social Security and this and that. The churches handle everything. They handled all the poor people, and I took this Heath County history course out here. Black family lived below. They couldn't get work, nobody had hired a black man, but he did have a little bit of work. But in the morning, when he'd get up, there'd be 3 or 4 bags of groceries there, clothes there,
Yeah.
hand-me-downs, and I wore hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
They were taken care of.
You're absolutely correct that historically there was no welfare or government system. It was the people of God that cared for poor people.
That's the way it's supposed to.
That is the way it's supposed to be.
If it has GOVT periods, there's going to be some mess up somewhere.
Yeah. Concerning elders, the elders who rule well, and let me just pause there, pastor, elder, bishop, same person, same situation, same position. The elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, "You shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages." And so this is a comment about taking care of the people who teach you, about providing their needs monetarily so they can live, and so the teachers and elders can dedicate themselves to studying the scriptures and prayer and teaching. Verse 19, "Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses." Isn't it easy to hear a rumor about somebody?
Oh, boy.
Yeah. If you searched not too diligently, you could find something about me. I've had all kinds of opinions about me over the years. If they go back far enough, they might be accurate. Before I was a believer, there's lots of things I could be accused of. But rumors are just evil. They're just evil. We shouldn't participate in them. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. We had a guy here that would meet people in the parking lot and tell them, "You don't want to come here. You need to get out of our parking lot." Yeah, he did. And when we found out about it, I said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I don't want the church to get so big, it's useless." So he's just running them off. Yeah. And we put a stop to it. But there are all kinds of things that people do. There are folks in town that I know that would call me a heretic and would say that we don't practice or teach evangelism of the lost. You guys know that's not true. But because of our connection with some historic figures, such as Calvin or whoever else, some of the reformers, those in the Arminian world have decided that since we believe that God saves who He will, when He will, if He will, then we don't take the gospel and share it with anybody. We don't call anybody to faith in Christ.
Hyper-Calvinism.
That is, and it's a sinful, wicked thing.
Amen.
Yeah, you're in disobedience to God and His Word if you are acting like that. The same same person on the extreme side of God's sovereignty probably doesn't pray because God's got it all worked out anyway.
I know Calvinist brothers that go out and hit the streets
Yes,
and are searching for the elect.
yes.
So they can't say that because we are out.
Right. They are. And the only answer I have to that, I say, well, it's not true, but if you really want to know for sure, just come sit at Sovereign Grace in the classes for a month. Just come and sit for a month. You'll hear the gospel every day.
Most of those were, as I remember, Free Will Baptist churches. Come if you can, if you can't, read this prayer, that type of thing, to be saved and salvation. But we were warned, we were told, I was there.
Yeah. There are all kinds of misconceptions and all kinds of things that will be said, but we want to do everything on our side of the fence to maintain a good reputation. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. So if one person in a church has an accusation against an elder, pastor, and you decide that, gee, that must be true, I'm going to tell the world, or I'm going to leave the church, or I'm going to attack him and see and give him what for. No. You need to, people are gossips. People say ugly things. Their mouths work from resentment sometimes. You've just got to make sure that the trouble that you've been told about actually exists. And your pastor ought to be a man you can go and talk to. Is this true? Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. In my studies of John 19, reading quite a bit of history, and thinking of punishment for crimes as a deterrent, the Jews would sometimes, if there was a capital crime committed and they put a person to death in some way, perhaps stoned him, they would then hang him on a tree in public and say, this is what he did, and this is what's waiting for you if you think you can do the same stuff. The consequence of committing a crime. That's kind of fell to the wayside in the last couple years, and more so as time goes on. Maybe there's a turning point coming soon. I hope so. But as concerns people in your congregation, those who continue in sin, rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. Now, I'm not certain whether this is the person who receives an accusation without proof and then responds to it, or if it's concerning the elder. I'm thinking it might be the elder, those who continue in sin, rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also would be fearful of sinning. Mike, do you have an opinion about that?
Verse 20, 19 and 20.
Yes.
Well, it's very clear. You don't receive an accusation against an elder. But if an elder is continuing in sin, that's when you rebuke that person. Now, who is in charge? Because usually in these churches there was a plurality of elders.
Right.
And so when one of them was caught up and decided he was going to go off the deep end for a while, he would be rebuked in public and dealt with
By the other elders?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So you think it's a reference to the elder in sin. Okay. Verse 21. I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of his chosen angels to maintain these principles without bias, without prejudice for gender, race, color, or whatever, doing nothing in a spirit of partiality. Partiality cannot exist in a church. It is a cancer. It is a cancer. If you have a seed of prejudice against another race, you need to talk to God about it constantly until it's fixed. If you have a seed of prejudice against anybody for anything, you need to deal with that before God. You won't be right until that's settled. Do not lay hands upon anyone too hasty and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others. Keep yourself free from sin. Now, verse 22 is interesting instruction to a young pastor. Churches need help all the time. They need help all the time, but he warns him here. He says, Don't lay hands on people too quickly and put them in office here or there and give them positions of authority or power quickly. Wait and see who they are. I used to tell people constantly when they came to church, they said, how do you join this church? I said, well, it's real easy, but we'd love you to stay a year before you decide you're going to join. And what was true of most of them after a year? They weren't there anymore. They had no heart for the kind of teaching and for the theology that was being taught, the things being taught. And so if we take members in just like waves, anybody who asks, then you're opening yourself up for the necessity of church discipline because they're now a member and they have these requirements set before them and they're not doing that. The other thing, the thing that we have done to fix this as far as is humanly possible, there's a 13-week course of study that we go through. There's a workbook we work through. And it's really a tool to get myself and the person who wants to be part of the church talking about every single aspect of theology and of what this church is about, what church is about in general. And so we get to know one another. And I've had people leave midstream because they began to hear what the gospel really said and what a Christian really was, and they weren't converted. I've had people who began thinking they were Christians, and halfway through or somewhere along the way, they saw that they never understood the gospel at all, and now they believe. So it helps so very much to take that time. It's a rough thing. How many of you could just instantly commit to an hour a week for 13 weeks without, do you have your schedule adjustable like that? It takes some commitment. But it's got to be done. Right now, I am about to start the process with a couple in Sholo. They'll probably never be part of this church, but they're not Christians and they need to hear the gospel, and there's no better way than to work through John MacArthur's Fundamentals of the Faith. And I've got them supposedly headed for White Mountain Bible Church, which is being attended by the lady who moved to Sholo. What was her name? Was it Joanne? Sharon. Yes. And she's just thrilled. She says it's solid, the hymns are solid, and the preaching's solid. So that's where I'm sending them. And I hope to engage the pastor there and tell him what I'm doing. And I want them to meet the pastor, and this is all in the conversation, and to go in and tell him that they intend to be married in July. And I'm working with my grandpa down in Globe, working through a workbook, and I want you to know what we're doing, and I'm looking for help from you as well. So we're giving it a shot. What's the thing? Zoom will let us get face-to-face, or the little round blue circle, Messenger. We can do that. So. And then, for the first time, we're talking about going to someone's home so they don't have to travel, because it's hard for them. So, but there has to be some kind of a fence built for a church. There has to be truth presented, truth understood, truth accepted, received, and responded to. And then you go on. The person says, yes, I believe it, I'm a Christian. Well then, after you've done all of that, you say, welcome. And then, if it goes haywire, and if it was all a joke and all a lie and a pretense, it'll show itself soon enough. So, you take care of it then. Is it 20 till... Oh, it's 5 minutes till we get out of here. Okay. Where are we?
23.
Verse 22, do not lay hands upon anyone too hastily, and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others. Keep yourself free from sin. My mind goes back to our early days when I did lay hands suddenly on a man to serve, and it turned disastrous. So I know firsthand that this warning is very, very important. Very important. My wife warned me, but I went with my thoughts rather than hers, and she was dead on. So you get a smiley face, sweetie.
Thank you, Mommy. I wish I had been right.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Keep yourselves free from sin. 23, no longer drink water exclusively, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. Some people are stronger physically and constitutionally than other people. Not everyone is just like us. And so they have to deal with the situation. Paul knew something about Timothy, that some infirmity plagued him, or weakness, or stomach trouble perhaps. And he says, use a little wine, and that should help the situation. That was common medicine in the day. Excuse me?
A little.
A little is a key word, yes. Yes. The sins of some men are quite evident, going before them to judgment. For others, their sins follow after them. You know, you don't know everything about me, do you?
We're good.
Yeah, you don't want to. We don't know everything about Dan or the two Aarons sitting back there, anybody. And isn't it wonderful we can't see into the minds of our brothers and sisters?
Amen.
For there's a spiritual warfare going on all the time. Flesh warring against the spirit, spirit against the flesh. If you saw the thoughts I try to drive out of my mind, maybe you'd say, he's normal, like everybody else. I fight that too. Hatefulness and bitterness and it's a constant battle. Flesh against the spirit, spirit against the flesh.